Okay, well, welcome to this meal planning workshop. I am really excited to share with you my technique for meal planning. I know this will look a little bit different for everyone, but this is something that I've been defining and redefining over the last few years. So this works really well for busy schedules that change all the time. So it's good for flexibility, and I'm going to walk you through how you can flex for different people, for different likes and dislikes, and incorporating things like your favorite meals as well. Before we get started, because I know that there are some people who maybe don't know me, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ann Kent. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and the owner of Peas and Happiness. And I put my credentials here because I think it's really important always to know who is giving you the information, especially, now there's a lot of experts in a lot of different fields. And so I just wanted to share with you what my credentials are. So I am a registered dietitian and I have a master's degree in nutrition and dietetics. But I also grew up on a farm, and so that is one of my passions, is supporting local farmers and being connected to agriculture. And then I also just love to cook for my friends and family. So I founded Peas and Happiness as a way to marry those three different silos: agriculture and nutrition and food. And I'm really just passionate about leaving the world in a better place than we found it. So you'll see aspects of all of these things sprinkled in as we talk, but that's just a little bit of my background. So let's talk about what we are going to talk about today. I have a 3-step plan for meal planning. The step 1 is to take into account what you have going on during your week. That's probably the most important thing, is to have a really good grasp of what you've got going on, how much time you have, so that you can make a realistic plan. Step 2 then is to plan ahead the meals that you're actually going to cook. I don't recommend to cook 3 meals a day or even every day of the week. And so planning the timing of when you're going to cook those can be really helpful as you're managing leftovers, making sure that you don't have too much or too little. Step 3 then is to kind of fill in the blanks with breakfast, lunch, and snacks. So any of the non-cooked meals, that's what we're doing in step 3, to make sure that, again, you have enough, but not too much. We'll then talk just a little bit about troubleshooting. What do you do if you run out of an ingredient? What do you do if your plan goes astray? And that's then when we'll really get into the question and answer. So like I said, at the end, we will draw for a winner of an annual Peas and Happy meal guide. So that should be fun, and I'm excited for that. So let's just go ahead and jump in. What you'll need, because this is an interactive workshop, I sent you these things in the email that you got, but I will also put this information in the chat. So you'll want to have the meal planning template. Let me grab this and share with you. The meal planning template. In addition, you'll have a Peas and Happy meal guide. That is the Peas and Happy meal guide from this last week. So if you are a current member and you already downloaded your meal guide, that's what we're going to be using to go over this. So you don't necessarily need to download the new one, but especially this template. If you don't have the template, then make sure you have a pad and paper, something that you can scribble some notes on, but we'll be walking through each of these pieces really distinctly as we go through this. You also need your calendar, because I don't know your schedule, only you know your schedule, and that's what's really important to put on the template as we go through this. So if anybody has trouble downloading those, shoot me a little note in the chat, but otherwise we will go ahead and start with step 1. So step 1, plan your week. I can't stress the importance enough of being realistic about your schedule and how much better that will serve you than trying to create a perfect plan. I've worked with many clients over many years, and myself included, it's tempting to try and create the perfect meal plan, especially it's the start of a new year. There's all these people talking about meal planning and diets and what are your goals, and those are good, and it's not bad to have an aspiration, but in order to have really long-lasting change, then you must be realistic with yourself about what you can do. So that is why we are going to put our calendar onto our meal planning template. So the first step we're going to do, and I'm actually going to walk through this with you as an example as well. The first thing I want you to do is to write your events down on the calendar. So this could be, you know, maybe on Wednesdays you have a late work meeting, or maybe on Saturdays you go to yoga, whatever it is. Maybe it's your kids' practice, or you know, maybe you have a friend over for dinner once a week or something like that. So whatever it is that is going on in your life, put those events on your calendar. The second thing to do is decide how often you want to cook at home. Now, this may also depend on the third step, which is to determine how many people you're feeding. So this may or may not change depending on your life. For example, we have our stepson with us half the time. So half the time we have a super hungry 11-year-old to feed, and half the time we don't. So managing the amount of leftovers we need and the quantities of food, it changes day to day, and having a good idea of who's eating when will help you to manage that and not have so much food waste. So the way I decide, or the way I annotate when I'm cooking, is to just draw a little star next to those days, and that's how I decide and know when I need to plan the cooked meals. So go ahead and grab that meal planning template, and I'm going to do this as well. You should be able to see my meal plan, and as you write down your calendar, I'm also going to write down my calendar to give you just an example of how I go about this. Okay, so you might not be perfectly done, but that is okay. As you can see, as I'm walking through this, you know, the first thing you'll notice is there are some days that I don't know what's going on, and that's normal. So, you know, don't panic if you don't have all of your days planned out. But if you have a good idea of, you know, the most important events, other things can change and flex around that, but make sure you have the known events on your calendar. The other thing you might notice is that I actually have a day where I have 0 eaters, and that's because family dinner this week is at my sister-in-law's house. So she is cooking and I don't have to. So that means that I don't have to make any food, but also I'm not going to have any leftovers. So that just helps me plan ahead. There's some days that you notice, you know, like date night or the weekend, that I don't have planned that I'm going to cook, and that's because we're probably going to go out to eat. I enjoy not cooking once in a while, and we love to support our local restaurants. So planning ahead on the nights, for the nights that I don't cook, is a great way to enjoy intentionally supporting our favorite restaurants and not feel bad about, you know, ordering pizza last minute or something. So we definitely still have pizza night. We just plan it into our schedules so that we know ahead of time what we're going to have. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to drop them in the chat, but we'll go ahead and I'll flip back over here to to continue moving on to step 2, which is to plan the cooked meals. So now that you sort of have an idea of the days that you're going to cook and also how many people you're going to feed, now's the time to fill in some of the blanks with what you're actually going to cook. My first recommendation for this, especially if you're new to meal planning, new to cooking, is to start with recipes you already know. I find a lot of times, we get a new cookbook for Christmas or like a new cooking utensil, like an Instapot or something. And it's like really exciting to try all these new recipes. But if you're trying everything new from scratch, it can be just super overwhelming. So I recommend to try maybe 1 or 2 new recipes a week. If you love trying new recipes and this is not a thing for you, then, by all means do that. But otherwise, just keep in mind that it generally takes longer to try a new recipe. And so you want to keep that in mind on the days you're planning. Don't plan a new recipe for a night that you're working late, that everybody's going to be hangry by the time dinner comes around. That's probably not going to bode well for success of the meal plan. So that leads me into the second point, which is to plan according to your schedule. So if you know you're going to work late, but you have a lot of mouths to feed, that might be a good day to plan a slow cooker meal that's going to be ready by the time you get home in the evening. So that's why we wrote those events on the calendar, is for you to get a good idea of what's happening so you can plan the right types of meals and not overwhelm yourself. The third point is to remember that we're trying to keep this balanced. And I like to think of the plate model, which is to balance with carb and protein and veggie. In the day, our bodies need about half of the food we eat should be a fruit or a vegetable, which is a lot of fruits and vegetables, right? And so if we're not planning ahead, it's really difficult to just magically get those. And that's why there is a space on the meal guides to just remind, or on the template to remind you to think in that carb, protein, and veggie outline. The last point here is that on the template, there's a space that you can mark which meals make leftovers. And again, that's to help you communicate with the rest of your family or eaters what might be available, but also to help you manage some of this inventory and manage the leftovers so that you don't end up making 4 giant meals and then having just way more leftovers than you know what to do with. So when you're selecting your recipes, these are some of the things that you need to know about the recipe in order to put that on your meal planning template. You need to know what the prep time is, and this is separate from total time of the recipe. A lot of times recipes will take a while to cook, but they don't necessarily take a lot of prep time. And so if you have a recipe that takes just a little bit of prep, but then has a long cook time, that might be a time for you to clean your kitchen. Maybe you could prep another meal while you're waiting on that meal to cook. But those two things are different. So this is listed in the Peas and Hoppy Meal Guide right underneath the name of the recipe. So it lists out separately the prep time, the cook time, and then the total time of the recipe. And those are both really important. So you know that in total time, this is like start to finish, when are we going to get dinner on the table? But prep time is more how much time are you personally investing versus how much of this is just on its own and cooking. The other thing to know is how much it makes. So on the meal guide, again, there's an indication of how many servings this is. Now, everybody's serving is a little bit different. I write all of these recipes and I base the serving size off of sort of an average person, an average adult, I would say. So if you have a very hungry 11-year-old like I do who is growing, it might not serve quite as many as it looks like on the meal guide. If you find that your appetite is not that big and you generally eat a little bit less than people around you, you might find that these servings are a little bit of an underestimate, and it might actually stretch a little bit further. So again, these are kind of general guidelines. Don't panic if it's a little bit different for you and your family. It's normal for the serving size to change based on your hunger and your specific calorie and energy needs. The other thing to know about the recipes is how the leftovers store. So some recipes are going to store better than others. Typically, the way to think about this is anything that cooks for a really long time usually will make better leftovers. So think soups or casseroles, mixed dishes, those typically will keep better. recipes that don't keep as well are those that have different textures. An example of that would be like French fries that are supposed to be soft on the inside but crispy on the outside. Everybody knows that leftover French fries get soggy and they're a little bit tricky to store. So if you have meals that you love but maybe are supposed to be crispy but soft, those might not be as good to double that recipe and use as leftovers. Whereas if we're looking at this list, the black bean and pumpkin chili is going to be even better the next day. So if you wanted to do leftovers, you could even double that meal and have a lot left over. You could even freeze that meal. A lot of times the recipes on these meal guides will have specific recommendations for how to store the leftovers. So you can always check that within the recipe and have a good idea of what's going on. I do have a question about halving the recipes, so cutting them in half. And most of these also work really well to have. Some of the recipes are written with the servings they are because they contain a full can of pumpkin or a full can of black beans, for example, with that pumpkin soup. And so those are going to be more difficult to have. But recipes like the pork chops and the turnips, totally easy to cut in half, no big deal. Our family eats a lot of leftovers because I don't like cooking all the time. And so intentionally having some leftovers is oftentimes really, really handy. So I rarely have recipes, but some of this is a case-by-case basis too. And that's why my meal guide members have access to a Facebook group where we can ask questions, because sometimes cooking is really specific and it's hard to know. Yes, and advice on freezing leftovers. So freezing is very similar to storing in the refrigerator. It depends on the type of food. So fresh vegetables typically don't freeze as well because they'll become mushy. But those long cook times are going to be better to freeze. Everything on this list except for the pork chops and buttery turnips would be pretty good to freeze because of the long cook time and the texture in the recipe. Substitution options is another thing that I just like to keep in mind. And this is a little bit more of an advanced technique perhaps. And so if you're not used to cooking, substituting can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. So in the meal guides and on all the recipes, I always include pro tips. So if there are ways that you can substitute different vegetables, whether fresh, frozen, canned, or just different types of vegetables, you can find that in the pro tips. Like I said, I also include information in the recipes on the storage on both leftovers in the fridge and also freezing. So you don't have to be an expert about everything on that, but you'll start to notice some of those patterns that the longer the cook time, the easier it is to store and freeze. So these are great questions. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to drop those in here. But we're going to take these recipes now. The other thing I'll just note on here is that there's 4 different types of recipes. This challenge recipe at the top is going to be the most difficult. That's what challenge means, right? Oftentimes I recommend that for serving for company or having, fun learning together with your spouse or friend, whatever that might look like. But the slow cooker recipe here, this is a good example of the difference between the prep time and the total time. So the prep time for this recipe is less than 30 minutes, which means that it requires not very much hands-on time, whereas the total time for this recipe can be up to 10 hours. So the reason there's so much variance in here is because you can cook this. There's instructions for cooking at a slower or faster speed. And this works really well if you're going to be out of the house for 8 hours, 10 hours, because you're outside of the house working. So something like this, you can prep with relatively minimal time, and then it's ready when you need it to be. And you can adjust the cook time based on how fast you need it to cook. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the meal planning template again, and I will continue filling mine out. I will let you use your recipes to fill yours out as well based on how often you plan to cook. If you are not cooking 4 times, that is perfectly fine. I find that the best way to know how often you should cook is to think about how often you cook right now in your life. And if you're feeling like, well, I never cook right now, that is totally okay. I would only recommend to cook 1 or 2 more times than you do right now. So if you're going out to eat for every meal right now, totally fine. Plan to cook 1 or 2 meals in the next week. the more you cook, the easier it will be. But when you're first getting started, it can feel really overwhelming. You're going to need different ingredients. You may not have all of the utensils you need. So starting slow is a much better way to approach this than overwhelming yourself and trying to cook too much at once. So with that rule of thumb, cooking 1 or 2 more times than you are right now, pick out your recipes and we'll put them on our meal planning template according to what works for you. Okay, again, you might not be totally done, which is just fine, especially because you might be looking at these recipes for the first time, and that's okay. But I'll just walk you through how I have planned this now. So first of all, I like to start with the easy stuff that I already know. So for example, I already know that we're eating at Aunt Jen's on Thursday for family dinner, so I don't have to plan anything for that. And then I know that my stepson Jonah will be with us on Wednesday. His favorite food in the entire world is mac and cheese. And so it is very, very important for us to include mac and cheese in our meals once in a while. He also loves brats. It's like our traditional meal. So as a reminder to balance out that meal and make sure that we're including all of the nutrition we need, the thing that I'm missing are vegetables, because brats is going to take care of the protein, mac and cheese is going to take care of the carbs, and so I need to add a vegetable to that. I might do frozen green beans. We're getting a CSA right now, so probably I'll find whatever vegetable we have in there and saute it or steam it and add it there. But that'll be a pretty easy dinner, which will be good because that day is going to be busy with homeschooling still and everybody working from home. The other thing I did here was I have a couple, I am making our black bean and pumpkin chili because I know it's simple but really delicious and a crowd pleaser. And then the next day I'm doing lentil tater tot casserole. I may or may not do this actually on that Saturday. As you can see, I don't really know what our plans are for the weekend, but planning one day with a meal and then planning one day to have leftovers is going to give me enough flexibility that if something changes last minute, it's not a big deal. I can really easily shift that. And then you can see that on Monday, we typically have date night and we typically go out to eat. It's one of my favorite things to do. Again, we are really enjoying supporting our local restaurants right now. And so I'm just going to go ahead and plan ahead to go out to eat. We may have leftovers from that day or we may not. It kind of depends. So if I'll have other lunch options just in case we don't have leftovers, or we might change up where we're going based on how many leftovers we have from the weekend. The last thing you'll notice is on Tuesday, I always work late on Tuesdays, and so I'm planning a 30-minute meal on that night. I know I'm going to need something simple. This is a super easy recipe that I can also just give to my husband and he can prepare. So we'll do something really simple keep it easy, especially since there are only 2 of us. So you can see that I did mark the days that we have leftovers. And since I know that we'll have leftovers 2 days in a row, then I know that I really don't need to cook that next day. So that's how I use that information to have a good idea about how much to prepare. I have a question. What's your favorite local restaurant for date nights? Oh my gosh. We rotate between a couple. Last night we had Mexican. We have a really, really good Mexican food, La Buena Vida. And our other favorite is the Himalayan Bistro, which is sort of an Indian restaurant. It has the most amazing food. So if you've never had Indian food, you live in Fort Collins, try the Himalayan Bistro. It is so good. The saag paneer is like out of this world. I cannot help. I like to get new things when I go to restaurants, but I can't help get the same thing every time because it's so delicious. Yeah, that's a fun question. Thanks for asking. Okay, any other questions about right now about this plugging in some of those recipes? I will switch back and we can now move on to step 3, which is filling in the blanks now. So we've got a lot of food now on the menu, and now we just need to plan breakfast, lunch, and snacks. So because we've planned ahead with some of those larger meals, my favorite thing to do is to use leftovers. They just, you know, make our life so much easier. It's a great way to get a 2-for-1. Again, focusing on the ones that generally lend themselves better to leftovers, they're going to be more delicious. The other thing to remember is that, you know, you don't have to start from scratch when you're trying to plan all of your meals. So use your own standards. I know that you've been eating lunch for your entire life, and so use your own lunch recipes, use your own breakfast recipes, and then rotate in some new ideas. I like to plan grab and go meals as some of our options. When I say grab and go, I mean things that take certainly less than 30 minutes to cook, or sometimes they don't even require cooking at all. They're simply grab the protein, grab the carb, and grab the veggie out of the fridge, and you've created your own meal. So things that are just really, really simple. Another thing that many people like to do is to prep on the weekend. I like to tweak this because I hate doing dishes. And so I like to prep ahead other meals when I'm already cooking. So if I have one of the meals that I have all of the cookware out, I have my cutting board and knife already dirty, then I'll go ahead and prep another meal while the meal is cooking. That works really well with casseroles, again, that are baking things, or even like a crock pot meal that you're preparing, and then it's in the slow cooker, and then you can prepare maybe the vegetables or whatever for another meal. The last point here is to add fruits and veggies to the snack list. And this is a way to help you remember what's in the fridge so that things don't get lost and go bad because nobody remembered that they are there. It's also just a way to encourage you to eat your fruits and veggies that you have purchased and would like to eat, but so often get forgotten. So this is just a really nice way that, when you're hungry and when you're needing a snack, you don't have to make a decision. You can just look at your list and it'll help you to choose a healthier option when one of those is presented to you right away. So on the Peas and Healthy Meal Guide, you'll notice that I have ideas for you here, because I do think that this is one of the things we struggle with a lot is, we can get in a groove of cooking regular meals, but then it's like, oh my gosh, what's for lunch? What's for breakfast? And we get in a routine, which is fine. But if you're bored with your routine, I've got some other options for you. So I'm always planning in this protein plus carb plus veggie model, and you'll see that with the grab and go meals. We're always using the protein, the carb, and the veggie. That way, if you are not a fan of one of those things, you can always switch them out. So it's really easy to modify these things, but just to give you some more ideas. There's always a savory option and a sweet option to give you some variety. That's true of the grab and go meals, the breakfast, and the snack inspiration. If you don't have a vegetable, then it's okay to include a fruit. You'll see that a lot of times on the breakfast menu, we might not have a veggie in there, but we have a fruit instead. Sometimes that's the case with the grab and go meals as well. Don't forget that you can use frozen and canned vegetables. I think a lot of times when we are trying to eat healthier, we want to eat so perfectly that we make it so hard on ourselves that we end up not doing it at all. So frozen veggies and canned veggies are a great option that will always be in your fridge or your pantry, and you don't have to wonder if they're going to go bad. This is can be a really good way also, if you're not used to cooking at home a lot, is to use some of those shelf stable ingredients instead of buying all fresh, so that you don't have to manage your inventory quite as closely. My last recommendation is to add a protein or a fat with your breakfast to help keep you full. A lot of our traditional American breakfasts, like cereal or yogurt, are mostly just carbohydrates. And while carbohydrates are not bad, they don't keep us full for very long. They tend to spike our blood sugar, and then but they don't hold our blood sugar up very long. And so adding a protein or a carbohydrate or a fat to those will help stabilize our blood sugar, which helps stabilize our energy levels. So that's why there's always options. Again, you can see the protein and the carb here. If I don't include one of those, then I always give you an option of how to modify it to include that instead. So I'll let you peruse this list, or again, you can just use your old standard favorites. And let's finish our meal plan with those breakfast, lunch, and snacks, and I will do the same. Okay, so you can see that some of the options that I have on our menu are from the meal guides, and some of them are just things that we eat all the time. So for example, the bagel and cream cheese, that's just a standard in our house. We always keep that on hand, and it's a really easy grab and go thing. I'll also probably make these bell pepper egg cups because they are really easy, but they will keep well enough for at least a couple of days. A question about a low FODMAP gluten-free bagel for bagel pizzas. I don't know of a low FODMAP for gluten-free. I know that those exist, but gluten-free bagels are kind of hard to find. I would actually recommend using tortillas. There's some really good gluten-free tortillas. Mission has a really good brand, and we like to make tortilla pizzas. So that might be another alternative instead of using a bagel, because it's tricky to find a good bagel. I would have to do some research and ask all of my celiac friends if they know any. But speaking of pizzas, that's actually one of the lunch options with those English muffin mini pizzas. So that's a really easy gluten-free switch. Again, is to use a gluten-free tortilla instead of trying to find gluten-free English muffins, which tend to be a little bit more difficult, and the texture is going to be a little bit different than the tortilla. Most of our lunches are leftovers, to be honest. I don't like cooking more than once a day because I don't like cleaning my kitchen more than once a day. And so we'll just use the leftovers as much as possible. Or our fallback is soup. We always have canned soup on hand. Again, it may not be the perfectly healthy thing, but it's better than a lot of other options. And it's something that we can warm up and get on the table in 15 minutes. So my snack options have to do with the season of the year. So oranges are in season right now. You probably noticed that they're on sale. So we always have seasonal fruit around. The easiest way to pick out seasonal fruit is to buy what's on sale at the grocery store, because what's on sale is in season. Cucumbers and hummus is on the list because I happen to get us a cucumber in our CSA, and we have extra hummus to use up. So I wanted to put that on the list so that everybody in the house knows that they should be eating their cucumbers and the hummus before it goes bad. And the last one is chips and salsa, because we have leftover salsa from last night's Mexican food that I also don't want to go bad in the fridge. So I'm going to remind everybody that they should be picking the chips and salsa instead of grabbing some other random chip from the pantry. So this is, again, is a way to help both manage our food inventory, give people some options, and also help you out when you're hangry so that you don't have to make a last minute decision that might not be what you actually wanted to do. So there you have it. That is your complete meal plan. And hopefully that is something that is easy. It's actually, it's practical and realistic for your lifestyle. I know it is challenging to follow through with some of these things, but I will tell you, you know, taking the time that you spend worrying throughout the week and sitting down on one day and actually thinking through some of these things can in the end save you a lot of time and a lot of stress and save you multiple trips from the grocery store. So the last thing I wanted to do was just to go through a little bit of troubleshooting, because I think one of the biggest reasons why we don't follow through with our meal plan is because something happened and the schedule went awry. Maybe you ended up working even later than you thought. Maybe you guys weren't home when you thought you would be. Maybe you had more people to feed. So the first thing I always recommend is to keep a list of your personal backup plans. These are a couple examples of mine. We always have ingredients to make a cheese quesadilla, and I always have a vegetable that I can saute really quickly. If I don't have a fresh one, then I definitely have one that's frozen. And that's a really easy protein, carb, and vegetable to use. We also always have spaghetti on hand and marinara sauce, and it's super easy to throw in some green beans and add a little bit of cheese for some protein. And again, these may not be the most perfect things that you want to have forever or for most meals, but they're going to save you a lot of stress in the long run. The other thing I recommend about backup plans is to not use them as part of your normal meal planning, because if you've had cheese quesadillas for 3 meals this week, you're definitely not going to want cheese quesadillas when you panic and don't have another meal. So keep those as only backup plans and use them once in a while when you need them. My other recommendation is to roll recipes in your next plan. So if you ended up not using all of your recipes, don't worry about it. Just roll those over into the next week. Most of the time it's going to be fine. So if you do have recipes that have more perishable ingredients, like avocados is a really great example. Avocados are like, you know, use them on day 2 or they're gone forever. Make sure that you plan those earlier in the week so that if something happens and your schedule changes, then you can still cook that meal before those ingredients go bad. Same thing with meat. So if you're planning to cook it on day 2 or day 3, but something happened, throw the meat in the freezer and pull it out then before you use it, instead of letting it sit there until it goes bad and then you're out of luck and you have to figure out something different. So there's nothing wrong though with pushing your recipes back a week. So that is totally okay. Again, as you're first figuring out your rhythm of how often to cook and how much you need to eat, this is not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of learning opportunities, and that's perfectly fine. So with that, I would love to open it up for questions. I will stop sharing my screen, and anybody who has questions is welcome to unmute and ask them out loud, or if you would prefer, you can simply type them as well.
So something I live alone. I cook. So when I meal plan, I only plan for myself. Mm-hmm. And so one of my issues tends to be boredom. Like I'm the only one doing the cooking too. So I don't want to make 4 different meals. Mm-hmm. I have no problem, throwing 1 or 2 things into the freezer, but like I often find myself eating, okay, it's the 4th day of eating this chicken dish. I'm sick of it. And now I have to scramble because I planned on eating this for 5 days in a row. And yeah, that's not happening. So that becomes a big issue for me with meal planning.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. I think that there's a couple different things that you can do. I don't know. One thing that I used to do when I lived alone was I would schedule like 1 dinner a week with other friends. I don't know if you have anybody in your COVID bubble who you can do that with, or if anybody else is interested, but to do like even just a menu exchange. It's a little bit different.
Not right now.
Yeah, that's okay. The other thing, like you just mentioned, like throwing things in the freezer, is like, maybe you cook twice a week and half of it just goes straight in the freezer, and you sort of like build up your own personal frozen meals. Have you done that?
Somewhat right now, honestly. My other challenge is I do butcher box, so I get a month's worth of, or more than a month's worth of meat at a time. So my freezer tends to be full of
Gotcha.
meat. So
That makes sense.
that becomes another, like,
Mhm.
it's not a huge meal prep challenge for that, but it does mean my freezer, it doesn't have a lot of room.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing you might consider is like repurposing some of your meals. So like if you cooked chicken, like the pork chops on the menu, for example, if you make the pork chops, maybe you eat those for 2 meals, like with the turnips, but then on like the next day you like shred them or cut them up and like put them in enchiladas or something, and like use the same food, but like make it in a different genre, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That takes a little bit of creativity and trying to like think through some of those things. Yeah, that's a hard challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I have a question from Dina. So do you next do a grocery list? Yes, absolutely. So that is something that we didn't talk about. Now that you've got once you have the meal plan, I would take that and just immediately make your grocery list from it. You can do the recipes with the meal guides. There's a grocery list that comes with each of the cooked meals. Of course, I don't know your food inventory, so that's another really important thing to take into account, is just what's already in your pantry. But yes, absolutely. Another question is, how do you pick an avocado at the store? So I like to pick my avocados slightly unripe so that it gives them a few days to ripen. Usually if you pick it right when it's ripe, then it's like already bad. So be careful about that. A trick, so your avocado should be just slightly squishy. It should not be super squishy, but just a little bit. And the other trick is the little stem at the top of an avocado, if you push it off, you should be able to see green in the avocado. And that generally, first of all, if it comes off easily, it means that it's almost ripe and it should be green. If it's brown, then it's too far gone. Good question. Avocados are tricky. Takes every once in a while, you just get a bad one too. So Paige says, you have other good, quick and simple snack ideas. So every week I have 2 snack ideas on the meal guides, because I think that this is one of like the most common things that we get bored of. This week was Parmesan popcorn and the roasted grapes. A lot of times I do fruit. I'm trying to think of some of our other snacks that we've recently had. I would have to pull up my, you know what, I had a download of a whole bunch of snacks. Ooh, apples and peanut butter, that's a good one. Yeah, my favorite snack, honestly, is fruit. It comes pre-packaged by nature, it's like already pre-portioned. So usually all you have to do is peel or wash it. So that's a really helpful thing. We also, a lot of times, use cheese with the fruit. If I fix a meal exactly as it is on the meal guide without adding anything, is it balanced between protein, carb, and veggie fruit? Yes, Pat, it is. So that's part of what I'm trying to do to make your lives easier. And so you don't have to think through, like, am I getting all of my nutrition? Yes, every meal guide is balanced. You'll see, and maybe you found that proportionally, you're eating a lot more vegetables. That's been one of the main comments that I've heard from people when they start eating some of these meals, is that like, oh my gosh, I'm eating a ton of vegetables. And that's because our bodies need a lot of vegetables, but oftentimes it's hard to figure out how to incorporate those. If the meal itself doesn't have a vegetable side, it's because the vegetable is already included in the entree. So like a good example is like the soup, or even like the lentil tater tot casserole. You're getting all of your nutrition that you need. There's mushrooms and the lentils within the casserole, so you don't necessarily need an extra side. It's already included in there. Oh, Meredith likes the eggplant mini pieces. Yes, they are super fun. It'll be fun when eggplants are in season again. Pat says, I'm having trouble getting used to not having something green at every single meal. Yeah, that I am glad you brought that up, Pat, especially this meal guide. it is, obviously it's January, it is freezing outside, it is, you know, there's snow. And so the meal guides are all written seasonally so that we can, first of all, give you variety throughout the year, also give you an opportunity to support local farmers. And eating seasonally is generally better. So right now, there's just not a lot of green things growing. There is a little bit of kale. Sometimes there's spinach at the grocery store, but a lot of our nutrition. So when we talk about eating in color, we don't talk about the fact that white is also a color, but things like parsnips or onions or bananas, those are all white, and they also do have nutrition. So even though the plate doesn't look as colorful as we're used to seeing it, you're still getting a lot of nutrition. So it is strange to get used to, though. So some of the pro tips this week were some ideas of getting some extra color on there because it was a little bit bland. Yeah, it's a good point. Can you freeze steamed spinach? Yes. It would still be mushy when it comes out. So the main thing with freezing vegetables is that what happens is the little cells, the water and then expands and they burst. And that's what makes those little cell walls are what makes your veggies crispy. So if you freeze fresh vegetables, that's why they're never going to be the same as if you cook vegetables from fresh. But if you've already cooked your vegetables, they're already soft, and so they're not going to be, you know, as intolerable. It's mostly a palatability thing. If you don't like mushy spinach, then you probably won't like frozen mushy spinach. If you enjoy the texture of that, then you'll enjoy the texture of it frozen. How many times a month would you recommend trying a new recipe? Honestly, it depends on your comfort level. If you love being in the kitchen and love trying new things, then, you know, trying a new recipe once or twice a week is probably not a big deal. If this is like, if you're brand new in the kitchen and you have to Google how to cut an onion and then Google how to cut a carrot and then Google how to cut a potato, that's going to take you like a really long time and it's going to feel really overwhelming. So yeah, it depends on how often you're cooking now and how much time you want to spend in the kitchen. I try new recipes 4 times a week because I'm testing them. But once you get used to that, then it becomes easier to try new recipes. And if the more often you cook, the easier it becomes because you don't have to look up all the things, and some of these things become a little bit more second nature. I don't know if that answered your question, Victoria. You know, Kat, I was thinking about the other, you know, what you were talking about with cooking for one person. And I don't know, there are some pre-made meals. I don't know if you've ever looked into like Freshly or anything like that. But if you're trying to do some like, you know, healthier prepped meals already, those are like, it's not like HelloFresh where like they send you the ingredients and then you have to cook them. Freshly is one where they like actually send you the meal that's already done, but it's like with fresher ingredients, so it's not like some of the other prepackaged meals. So I haven't tried them personally, but I've had several friends who've done them and have really liked them. But that could be a way to sort of like split the difference and like cook once or twice a week and then like take the pressure off you a little bit, because that's a lot.
Yeah, I think I've seen commercials for them. I'll look into that.
Yeah, it is pricey, so that's going to be the main thing. There's also, I've seen, I don't know where you're located, but like here in Fort Collins, there's some local companies who do that as well, like some who make it pretty fresh and then deliver it. So
I'm in New York City, so I'm sure we have something.
I'm sure you have lots of options in. Yeah, yeah. So you'd have to Google it, but I'm sure you do have some options.
Yeah.
Is there a frozen dinner that is good to have on hand for a backup? Great question. So there's 3 different brands that typically are a little bit balanced nutritionally. One is, let me see if I can remember all of them now that I'm thinking of HelloFresh. So the Weight Watchers one is, somebody's going to have to help me.
Smart Ones?
Yes, Smart Ones. Thank you. Yes.
I do keep those on hand.
Yeah. Lean Cuisine is another one that tends to be a little bit better, a little bit lower in sodium and a little bit more balanced. And there's another one. I'm going to have to think about it. Yeah, I'll send you those 3. Smart Ones, Weight Watcher, Healthy Choice. Yes, Charisse, thank you. Amy's is gluten-free. I haven't taken a look at the balance of like how many veggies there are. For a lot of these pre-made meals, again, thinking back to the balance of protein, carb, and veggie, the main thing that they're missing is the vegetable. So you can really easily supplement another veggie or add a fruit with your dinner especially if it's not keeping you full. A lot of the challenge with a lot of those frozen dinners is that they're just small. And so if you're pretty active or you're doing any exercise, then it's probably not going to fill you up. I would add a fruit or a veggie to go with it to help keep you full. Ruth says, looking at the pan-seared pork chops, not sure we will like oregano, basil, and thyme. What would you recommend to simplify? Maybe salt and pepper and one other? Yeah, so oregano and basil are pretty common spices. They're like Italian spices. Thyme is going to be the most different there. So, and you can tell that by smelling it. That's a really good way if you're like not sure, if you're looking at a new recipe, like, will I like this or will I not? Smell the ingredient. And if you're like, yeah, this smells weird, then leave it out. Maybe you can add a little bit of it later just to try it. But just doing basil, salt, and pepper would be a really easy alternative. Another option, if you're again wanting like a really simple seasoning, is to go down the spice aisle, look at some of the blends and pick the ones that look good to you. So if there's like an Italian blend or a Mexican spice blend or something like that, pick those and work with those. Oh, Pat uses onion powder, garlic powder, and celery salt and pork chops. Yeah, that's a good one. Absolutely. My issue is that I get overwhelmed with the whole process. It is overwhelming, especially since we live with my parents and daughter. So then I just give up. I was thinking of trying to just focus on a few days a week to start. Thoughts? Yes, Hannah, I think that's a really good idea. And in fact, I might even simplify more since you have so many different people, and probably that means you have a lot of different palates and lots of different likes and dislikes. I would maybe think about doing like one day a week. It could be in a weekend if you want to, or if those are really, really different, then maybe it's like Taco Tuesday kind of thing. Like every Tuesday you make a meal. But I would maybe pick like one day a week and just focus on making a recipe. If you can do that, you'll start to build your repertoire. A lot of the problem with getting started is just that, you know, everything is new. And so if you can start taking some of the newness out, it'll get less overwhelming. But I would start with just one day and then maybe pick like, you know, if you want to have like a grab and go lunch or something for like just you and your daughter or something, that might be easier than trying to be responsible for feeding everybody. If you have more questions, feel free you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording of our conversation. So if something comes up overnight and you want to, you know, shoot me a quick question, feel free to send me a message. If it's something that I can't answer really quickly or over email, I do also have one-on-one nutrition consultations, so we can always set something up if you would like a little bit more one-on-one time. But I'm happy to answer any, you know, one-off questions via email if you would like. And again, this is part of, this kind of brings us to our meal guide drawing, our winner. What day of the week do the new meal guides go out? Great question. The meal guides go out on Thursday. And the reason for that is because most people I found tend to plan when they have more time on the weekends. And so you have a chance to take a look at what's on the menu, have an idea of what you want to make, and then maybe sit down. I like sitting down with a cup of coffee because it makes my life better, and thinking through what we're going to do. And then you can go do your grocery shopping. But as part of the meal guide membership, we have a private Facebook group, and that gives us an opportunity to ask some of these questions or to think through some of these things, because, you know, these are all really common challenges, cooking for one, or figuring out leftovers, or just feeling overwhelmed. So you are not alone, you are not crazy. This is all normal. So let's go ahead and do this drawing. It looks like most people's questions have been answered. I want to show you, I'll share my screen again really fast. So what we're talking about, the meal guides, for anybody who has not seen these before, they are a weekly meal plan. That's exactly what you use today. So you actually got this last week's meal plan. Again, that's why they are so filled with root vegetables and not filled with things like zucchini, because zucchini is not in season. But in addition to the weekly plans and the recipes, it does include a grocery list. But part of this is the education and support. So I feel really passionate about helping make cooking attainable for people. So these are not chef inspired meals. These are meals that I consider myself an average home cook. You should be able to make these with ingredients you can find in your local store. But we have a Facebook group where you can ask questions. There's pro tips on all these recipes to just give you a little bit more information about what to do this, about how to cook and how to make it practical. And the reason why I say it's good for your wallet and the planet is because I include a lot of plant-based recipes in this. You probably noticed the vegetarian meal on the list, and that's because we know that plant foods are really, really healthy for us. They also tend to be less expensive, and they also tend to be better for the planet. So that's why we are learning those. Okay, so this is an annual membership is what we are drawing for, which all of these things are included in this. So this is a $120 value. So I have this lovely random generator, and let me see, we have 23 participants. Crystal Sunbee, you are the winner. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
Yay.
I will send you an email. Actually, if you don't mind just staying on the line a couple more minutes after we close, I will grab your email address and make sure I have the right one, and we will get you signed up.
Awesome,
So,
thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So, yay, we are here. This is, yeah, just a really fun community that we've started to develop. And I hope to see you. I know I'll see some of you going forward. Some of you are members already, but we would love to have anybody else join us in this journey of healthy eating, which we are all on. So I'll stay on the line for a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions that you wanted to ask, but we'll wrap up pretty soon because I know that your time is valuable. So thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate your time, and Happy New Year. Blessings to you all, and we will talk soon. Take care, everybody.